Hello, friends. Mr. Baines here with today's knowledge lesson. Today we are starting a new lesson on more fairy tales. Now, many fairy tales, including the one that you will hear today, were collected long ago by two brothers named Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. They are often called the Brothers Grimm. The brothers lived in a place now called Germany, which has been colored gray so that you can spot it out. And many of the stories that we now know as fairy tales had been told orally for many years in their country and in other countries as well. The brothers decided to write the stories down and make a book out of them. Some of these stories you may have heard before, but some may be completely new to you. In today's fairy tale, and in another fairy tale that you will hear later, we will talk about spinning wheels. Spinning wheels are tools used to spin thread and yarn. People use parts of certain plants such as cotton and flax, wool from animals like sheep and alpacas, and even hair from certain types of goats and rabbits, all used to make thread and yarn. Thread and yarn are made by spinning or tightly twisting the plant fibers, wool or hair around and around until they form a long piece. Most thread and yarn is made by machines in factories today, but some people still use spinning wheels to make their own thread and yarn. Listen carefully to the fairy tale so we can find out about a problem caused by these spinning wheels. Once upon a time, there lived a king and a queen who for many years were very sad because they had no child. At last, a little daughter was born to them, and the king was so happy that he planned a great feast in the palace to which he would invite all of his friends and family members. Now, in his country, there were 13 fairies. Of course, the king wished to invite all of the fairies to the feast as well, so that each might look kindly upon his child and perhaps give the baby a special fairy gift. But as the king had only 12 golden plates for the fairies to eat from, it was decided that one fairy had to be left out. The feast was held, and what a wonderful celebration it was. As it drew to an end, the fairies came forward to give the child their special gifts. One said to the child, "I will give you the gift of virtue, so that you may be good." And another said, "I give you the gift of wisdom, so that you may be wise." A third fairy gave the child a gift of beauty. A fourth gave her riches, and on it went, with each fairy giving everything in the world that one could wish for. 11 of the fairies had given their gifts, and the 12th was just about to speak when suddenly in came the 13th fairy, the one who had been left out. She was very angry, and she cried out in a loud voice, "When the princess is 15 years old, she shall prick herself with a spindle and die." And without another word, the angry fairy left the hall. Everyone was terrified at what she had said. Then the 12th fairy came forward and said, "I cannot undo the evil spell, but I can soften it a bit. Here, then, is my gift to the child. The princess shall not die, but she will fall into a deep sleep for hundreds of years." The king was determined to protect his child. "Surely," he said, "my daughter cannot prick herself with a spindle if she never sees one." So he gave an order that every spindle in the kingdom should be burned. And over the years, as the princess grew up, and all of the fairies' gifts to the child were plain to see, she was good, wise, kind, and beautiful, and everyone who saw her loved her very much. On the day that she turned 15, the king and queen were away from the palace. The princess was left on her own, and she wandered about the palace looking into all sorts of places and peeking into rooms that she had never explored before. She climbed a narrow, winding stair that led to a little door with a rusty key sticking out of the lock. She turned the key, and the door opened. And there, in a little room, sat an old woman with a spinning wheel, busily spinning away. "Why, good day," said the princess, entering the room. "May I ask, what are you doing?" For she had never seen a spinning wheel before. I am spinning, said the old woman. The princess stretched forth her hand and asked, "What is this thing that spins around so merrily?" But hardly had she spoken when she pricked her finger on the spinning wheel spindle, and in that very moment she fell into a deep, deep sleep. And at that very moment, sleep fell upon everyone in the palace. The king and queen, who had just come home and were in the great hall, fell fast asleep. The horses in their stalls, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, even the flies on the wall, all fell fast asleep. Even the fire on the hearth went out. The wind stopped, and not a leaf fell from the trees. In time, a hedge of horns began to grow around the castle, which grew thicker and higher every year, until at last nothing could be seen of the castle, not even the flags on the highest towers. And as the years passed, stories began to spread throughout the land of a beautiful princess sleeping behind a wall of thorns. Many a young prince came, but none could break through the thorns. But at long last, after many, many years, there came into the country a king's son who heard an old man tell that there was a castle standing behind the hedge of thorns, and that there a beautiful, enchanted princess lies sleeping. The prince said, I shall make my way through and see the lovely princess. The old man warned him that many had tried and failed, but the prince would not listen. Now the 100 years were at an end, and the day had come for the sleeping princess to be awakened. When the prince drew near the hedge of thorns, it changed into a hedge of beautiful flowers, which bent aside to let him pass. When he reached the castle yard, he saw the horses and dogs lying fast asleep, and on the roof the pigeons were sitting with their heads under their wings. As he entered the castle and climbed the steps, the prince saw everyone still asleep. The king, the queen, the cook, the maids, everyone. All was so quiet that he could hear his own breathing. At last, the prince went up the narrow winding stair and came to the room where the princess was sleeping. When he saw her looking so lovely in her sleep, he could not turn his eyes away. He bent down and kissed her, and she opened her eyes and smiled at him. Together, they went down the stairs, and they saw the king and queen waking up, and all the people in the castle waking up and looking at each other in great surprise. The horses in the yard got up and shook themselves off. The dogs sprang up and happily wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof flew into the fields. The flies on the wall buzzed and crept a little farther. Even the kitchen fire leapt up and became ablaze. At last, the wedding of the prince and the princess was held with great feasting and rejoicing, and they lived happily together for the rest of their days.